Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome back. Welcome to those who are joining us online. It's lovely to have you back in the room this afternoon, and we have lots and lots to talk about. Before I start, while we still have some people just finding their seats, before I start, a quick show of hands. Who had a really fabulous, interesting conversation over lunch with someone that they've never spoken to before? Yeah, isn't it absolutely wonderful? I was talking to a farmer called Andrew from Ireland. Is he in the... There he is, down there. We had a really interesting conversation about just about everything, including wool prices with all sorts of different things. But he was saying just how nice it is to come here to talk to other farmers and people with just different experiences. And he was mentioning the stories actually from yesterday with the young female farmers, with the cost of insurance and digging the animals out of the snow, and just how nice it is to find people who have, similar roles to play within the sector, but with entirely different experiences. So I hope that you've managed to meet some people that you will take those stories home with you. More chances to meet people later this afternoon. And more chances now to hear different perspectives from those working within the sector and looking at the sector and focusing again on the Outlook report. So if you remember, we started this morning talking about yields and productivity. We then talked about the global outlook and the uncertainty and the different markets, the shape of markets, the trade opportunities. Some really interesting examples on this stage. What we're going to do now is look at the fourth area that Benson mentioned earlier, and that is farm income. So we've got some real-life stories for you, as well as those that look at the sector and try and understand these things. So, ladies and gentlemen, to get us into the depths of the finances and the economics, please welcome your moderator for this session, Tamsin Rose.
Hello, everybody. So this is going to be the real session where we talk about the financial viability for farms. We heard a little bit about the challenges of generational renewal, and is farming an attractive career for young people? And this is what it's all about. Is there a sort of viable future for farms? What's the income that might be expected from some of the changes and challenges we've talked about? And we heard really very positive messages about the productivity on European farms. We heard a little bit about competitiveness. We've explored the resilience and how sort of new attempts to deal with global challenges are really being dealt with at the farm level. But in this session, we're going to talk money. We're going to talk what does this mean, and we're also going to be looking at how that balances with consumer interests. So let me invite to come up and join me. I'm going to start by inviting Pascal Tilly, a research fellow at the Joint Research Centre, who's going to give us a short introduction to that part of the EU outlook. And when he's finished, I'll bring up my panel. But let's first give our attention to Pascal.
Thank you, Tamsin. Thanks a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, the audience, good afternoon. I hope you enjoy your lunch and the opportunity to connect with each other. Certainly, you've been reading extensively the Middle Outlook report, as suggested by Sasha, and been discussing the results. So we now continue with a specific look at the future performance of EU farms. So this is the first time that the farm outlook is included in the medium-term outlook. So it's my pleasure to be here to give you a glance at those results. So without further ado, let me start. So we've seen this morning in the presentation of Ben said this slide that agriculture income per worker will continue to grow towards 2035 thanks to labor productivity. We now look more in details at the situation for different types of EU farms. But first, important to mention that this analysis only focuses on market-oriented farms, which represent 90% of EU farmland. For those farms, we project the evolution of agricultural income based on outlook assumptions for price and productivity into 2035, and we compare it with 2020 income, our reference year. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you will see a graph that breaks down this comparison of farm income per annual working unit, AVU, or worker, between 2020 and 2035, and by decile of income per worker. So let me explain this. Deciles are a way to look into the distribution of any indicators. In this case, it's income per worker. To construct this graph, we rank all EU farms in our sample according to their income per worker, and we divide them into 10 groups of equal size, so that the bottom 10% of EU farms with the lowest income per worker are in the first decile, and the top 10% of farms with the highest income per worker are in the decile 10. So overall, income per worker remains stable for EU farms. But what this graph shows us, when we look into details, is that farms in the middle deciles, from decile 2 to decile 7, in the middle of the distribution, will actually experience an increase in their income per AVU, per worker, by 2035. So now looking at the graph or the heat map on the right, it shows us that how these income change are distributed by farm types horizontally and by economic size vertically. This tells us that livestock farms are likely to perform better than crop farms. Dairy farms and other grazing livestock farms, so mainly meat farms, will see an increase in gross income by 2035, mostly driven by favorable medium-term market conditions, expected productivity gains. This represents an increase of farming gross income by 90% for dairy farms. In turn, granivore farms could face a substantial reduction in gross income due to the projected decrease in production volume. And crop farms, including field crops, horticulture, permanent crops, and wine farms, will experience similar income drop due to yield stagnation and rising input costs compared to output price. Again, we can break down this trend by economic size, which are the categories usually used of standard output in euros. We see then that smaller farms in economic size classes 1 and 2, which means standard output less than 25,000 euro a year, will experience a larger decrease in farm income in real terms from 2020 to 2035 than larger farms. Let's now have a deeper look into the field crop farms. This category includes those farms that are specialized in arable crop, such as wheat, barley, oil crops, protein crops. On the graph on the left, you can see the distribution of changes of income per worker for field crop farms and different deciles. Overall, income per worker is projected to decrease by about 9% by 2035 for those farms. This decline is mainly due to decreasing real output prices, while variable costs will remain stable. Note here that all deciles of income per worker are expected to be affected, but the highest income decile, decile 10, will experience a 16% reduction. On the right-hand side, we have a graph that shows the prediction of farm viability. Farm viability is an indicator that assesses how well farms are performing in facing or covering their costs. There are 4 categories of farms according to this typology, ranging from category 1, that are the most viable and can cover all their costs, and to the category 4, that are the most inviable, with negative income and losses exceeding the value of depreciation. So for field crop farms, we see that the proportion of farms in the most viable category increases with economic size, and this trend is expected to remain in 2035. However, the share of viable farms, viable field crop farms, which are those in category 1 and 2, most viable and still viable, is projected to decrease from 93% to 87% by 2035. This decrease will affect all economic size classes, but will be particularly severe for the largest farms, the bottom right bars, and the smallest farms left on top. Moving on to dairy farms, we can see a more positive outlook. Farm income per worker is projected to increase by 15% on average for dairy farms by 2035. This increase is driven by higher milk price projections, increased productivity, and more favorable gross margin in the medium run. As shown on the graph on the left, the increase is not uniform across deciles, with the largest gains expected for farms in decile 4 and 5, so in the middle of the distribution, and for decile 10. On the right-hand side, you see that dairy farm are expected to see an increase in the proportion of farms in the highest viability group, so category 1 of most viable farm. This is again due to favorable prices and increased productivity, which would help dairy farms to cover their costs. Most dairy farms already belong to the first two viability groups, with some economic size classes having over 90% of farms in the most viable category. The sector shows economic resilience, with only a small proportion of non-viable farms, particularly in the smallest economic size classes. Let's look at another farm type, so horticulture, wine, and permanent crops. As shown in the graph on the left, farm income per worker of this farm is projected to decrease by 2.5% by 2035 on average for all decile. But the decline is due to decreasing real output prices, but stable input prices. Income per worker trends vary by decile, with potential increases in income per worker for decile 2 to 7, but potential decreases for the bottom 10% of the farm in decile 1, and for farm with the highest income per worker in decile 8 to 10. On the right-hand side, we can see that the proportion of viable horticulture, permanent crop, and wine farms is expected to decrease from 87% in 2020 to 83% by 2035. Largest farms, with a standard output of more than 500,000 euro, will be most affected, with a 9% drop in viability and a 7% increase in the least viability category. Smaller farms will exhibit resilience, with many moving from category 1 to 2, but only a relatively modest increase in non-viable and most inviable farms. Larger farms are more vulnerable due to the higher proportion of horticulture farms among this category, and they are more affected by market conditions at wine and other permanent crops. Okay, finally, let's look at the environmental performance of EU market-oriented farms. As shown on the slide, the overall environmental impact of EU farms is projected to improve by 2035, with an 8.5% reduction in greenhouse gases emissions, primarily driven by livestock farms and by the evolution of this sector. Nitrogen surplus, the second indicator, is expected to be reduced, again driven by livestock farms, which will experience decreased feed requirements due to increased productivity. And crop farms are also contributing to the reduction here, due to a shift in their case to less input-intensive crops. Changes in erosion risk are projected to be relatively small, with magnitudes below 2%, driven by changes in crop allocation, particularly among small farms. So in conclusion, our analysis of the EU farm performance shows that while there are challenges ahead, particularly for field crop farms and for smaller farms, there are also opportunities for growth and improvement, particularly in the dairy sector. The environmental performance of EU farms is also expected to improve. As we move forward, it's essential to continue monitoring, analyzing the performance of EU farms and ensure that they remain competitive, sustainable, and resilient in the face of changing market conditions and environmental challenges. I hope you appreciated this first-time farm-level analysis. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you a very pleasant panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Let me now invite my panel to come up and join me and to discuss that. So first of all, welcome Monika Nebeška, a cereals and oilseeds farmer from the Vyšehrady Agricultural Cooperative in Czech Republic. And just to let you know, she'll be speaking in Czech, so make sure you have your headphones ready. Please, Monika, come and join me. Also welcome Samuele Tonello, the Senior Food Policy Officer for the European Consumer Organization, BEUC, wherever you like. Now I'd like to invite Lukasz Łużakowski, the Managing Director of the IFCN, the Dairy Research Network. Please join me. And Jesus, the Director for Sustainability for DG Agriculture and Rural Development of the European Commission. So, colleagues, please come and join me. And as Pascal just said at the end, this is the first time that the EU Agri Outlook has applied the analysis of the economic impact and the environmental impact at farm level. So I think that's quite important. This is a very new element. And there was a lot of detail in that presentation. I was scribbling down notes. But the first thing I'd like you to do as a panel is just respond to what we've heard and in that message, where we saw that there's an analysis according to size of the difference of impact and on the type of farms. And I think there's a lot of information in there that we should respond to. I think, Monica, I will probably ask you to be the first person to respond on that, because there were messages there, particularly for cereals and for grains, and I know that's the area you're in. So just make sure everyone has their headsets. And unless you speak Czech, you need to have a headset. And thank you to our lovely interpreters who make sure that we can have panelists who speak in different languages and we can understand each other. Okay, go ahead, Monica. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Tak v češtině. Já bych asi měla úplně v úvodu možná představit trošku sebe a hlavně farmu, kde jsem předsedkyní představenstva 20 let a jsem zároveň i generální ředitelkou, ale je potřeba zdůraznit, že v této farmě, na této farmě, v této společnosti jsem už 30 let, 10 let jsem byla finanční ředitelkou. Jsme farma, jsme prvovýroba, máme 29 vlastníků, nebo je nás 29 vlastníků farmy se silnou rostlinnou výrobou a živočišnou výrobou a hospodaříme na 2500 hektarech, moderním a zároveň ke krajině šetrným způsobem. Dokonce v památkové chráněné oblasti. Tím, že máme živočišnou výrobu, tak samozřejmě vracíme organickou hmotu do půdy od našich 1700 kusů zvířat. Dovolím si dokonce tvrdit, že v rostlinné výrobě patříme mezi lídry v inovacích i v moderních technologiích, ale zároveň máme na tradiční a vyzkoušené metody. Obiloviny, o kterých se tady bavíme, pěstujeme na 1000 hektarech a oleniny na 250 hektarech. Dále pěstujeme cukrovou řepu, kukuřici, samozřejmě pro naši živočišnou výrobu, ale také pro naši bioplynovou stanici s výkonem 1,2 MW. Naše farma, moje farma, naše farma, patří i mezi významné pěstitele zeleniny v České republice. Pěstujeme na 90 hektarech cibuli a na 60 hektarech brokolici. Jsme také prodejci zemědělské a zahradní techniky a je dobré zdůraznit, protože před chvilkou jsme se bavili o příjmech a kolik máme zaměstnanců a kolik vlastně si zaměstnanci vydělávají, tak v mojí farmě pracuje nastálo 120 zaměstnanců a 160 mimo, když je hlavní sezóna. Jinak hodně se tady mluvilo dneska, včera o generační obměně a takovou raritou je, že včetně mě, moje farma má průměrný věk týmu 32 let. Když si to spočítáte, tak vlastně, nebo když to vidíte, tak vlastně naše farma začala generační obměnu poměrně úspěšně. Ale je tady zase potřeba říct, že naše farma už 15 let je školním závodem pro 2 střední školy se zemědělským zaměřením a mimo jiné spolupracujeme i s vysokými školami. Já sama jsem ve správních radách 2 českých státních univerzit. Jak je vidět, generační obměnu není možné vidět z krátkodobého úhlu pohledu. Je to dlouholetý proces, který přichází jak s dobrým jménem farmy, tak samozřejmě a především s dobrým jménem zemědělství jako takového. A ještě jedna poznámka k generační obměně. Ne každý chce být aktivním zemědělcem, soukromně hospodařit, ale chce být zaměstnán, protože řada taky lidí, a já to vidím z té praxe, že chce mít jenom prostě omezenou odpovědnost a zemědělství potřebuje vlastně i takové šikovné traktoristy a šikovné ošetřovatele skotu. No a tyto detaily uvádím proto, aby bylo zřejmé, že naše výroba je diverzifikovaná. Že problematiku, o které se tady bavíme, vnímám očima posledních 30 let, svýma očima posledních 30 let, a že farmaření je z pohledu produkce, tvorby krajiny a sociálních vazeb především moje láska. No a tu naši praxi a obrovskou lásku ukazujeme, prezentujeme a dokonce před půl rokem na naší farmě strávila paní Eva Pavlová, což je manželka prezidenta České republiky 2 dny, plánovala 2 dny a nakonec u nás zůstala 4 dny. Takže to k představení a doufám, že na to bude možná asi teda budou na to navazovat určitě další otázky a nejen od vás, ale i z publika.
Thank you very much, Monica. And yes, how lovely to have had the wife of the president come and spend a little bit of time to see the realities of life on the farm and understand some of the challenges of a working farm. So thank you very much. Samuel, let me bring you in because you represent the consumer organisation, and in earlier panels we talked about that challenge of changing consumer demand and that consumers have, they want farming to be high quality, they want good animal welfare, they want to meet environmental processes, they want good nutrition. So there's huge demands from consumers, and we've just heard there about some of the challenges about the economic viability of farms who then have to meet that. So what's your response to what we just heard?
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite, first of all. And I think it's important to position, first of all, the consumers in these debates. I've been following the discussion since yesterday morning, starting from President von der Leyen, Commissioner Hansen, and all the other panelists. And I think that the objectives and the goals that were set really well resonate with consumers. So when we are talking about the importance of food security, and then making sure that European consumer can access food that is safe, of quality, European, and that all this production is also made in a way that is as environmentally sustainable as possible. All this resonates very well with what are consumers' expectations and demands. And so if we look at consumers, really here, there is a strong support and a will to play a part in this. What is, I think also what is missing a bit in this debate is there is a famous idiom that says, you can't see the forest for the tree. And so if we look at the tree, there is really this consumer perspective. But if we step back a little bit, we need really to see how the system is designed to make sure that consumer can follow up on this expectation. And here it's how is the system designed for this? Can consumers access the choices they want to make? And so here, just to mention some examples, consumers need to trust the food system. And for this, they must have transparent and clear information. And so do they have the information to follow up on this? So for example, on origin labeling of food, on animal welfare, on nutritional labeling. And so all these different parts, do they have the information to reward those who are acting at best in the food system? And here we can improve to make sure that the consumer can access this information. At the same time, information is only a part, because then we should consider also, can they access? We will talk later more about can they also afford this? And so otherwise, there is an intention-action gap, which I think is always depicted in this debate. So consumers want, but often they can't follow up on these points. And so when I think we are discussing about consumer and the choices, really the debate, and why I mentioned the forest and the need to step back, is have we designed the system in a way that really empowers consumers and offers them the choice to follow up on this commitment? So yes, there are a lot of expectations, but consumers do not design the system. And so we really need to make sure that this system is designed in a way that then consumer can really access the choices they want to make.
Okay, thank you. Lukasz, let me invite you to reflect on that. I thought that Pascal's first intervention showed quite sort of strong differences between the impacts on farm incomes and environmental performance for dairy and livestock compared to other types of farms. And it felt like there was some good news and some bad news in there. So let me invite you to reflect on what you heard.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I think it was good to see that there is such a good result for the dairy. As IFCN is monitoring the production costs in more than 55 countries globally. We collect data. We have quite good overview. From what I saw today out of this panel and previous, I will be a bit more, reluctant to say that we will be still growing with milk in Europe. And in our prediction, we see that there is a bigger chance that the production of milk will be contracting, will be slowing down. But for sure, when we look globally, I think this is the FAO numbers for up till 2050. We need 70% more food in the system, and I think dairy will be serving into the protein market, and I think we discussed that already. So I think if we look through Europe, for me, the discussion need to be around the profitability. Because we talk about the productivity, we talk about the consumers, and I agree here, this is the perception, but it needs to be about money. Because at the end, of course, the products need to be affordable with specification which the clients requests, of course, but we know that European market is also slowing down. We see that, where I'm living in Germany, the economic situation is also, for the consumers, not the best. People are selecting the cheaper products. And in the same time, we are putting a lot of legislation on the supply chain, on the farmers. So we need to balance this out. And I think that's why I think priority for the next year shall be the profitability. I think for future for dairy is there. If we look also from our outlooks until 2035, we see there will be constant increase of milk prices globally in terms of commodities. We observed that already in the last 10 years. But in the same moment, we see that globally the cost of milk production are growing too. So right now there is no safe haven, if I say like that, globally, where you could magically produce extra milk. Yes? And I think I'm very happy to see that there is a future for the income. But yeah, we need to discuss a bit more deeper about the differences and our competitive position as a EU globally.
Thank you. Gijs, this is the first time that the Commission has undertaken this process and put it in the agricultural outlook. And by breaking it down into type of farm and into size of farm, did you learn anything new? Is there something particular in the way you've presented it? Because it's really interesting to see a level of granularity that we wouldn't have seen before. And given that we're at a time of cost of living crisis and farmers are calling out for change, how important was it that you were able to map out the impact at farm level?
Yeah, thanks. No, I think it's very important, if only because farm income is one of the objectives of the Common Agricultural Policy in the treaty. So looking at farm income is where a lot of the things that were discussed over these days come together, and you really see what the impact is. And I think the real value added of this chapter, this new assessment in the Outlook report, is that we also project forward. We follow very closely farm income developments, but doing projections is much more difficult. So I think that is really the advantage of this assessment. So you asked when you started this panel, like, what was your first impression? My first impression was, God, there's a lot of work for us, because some of the analysis, some of the projections for 2035 means what can we do with policy? Can we, with policy, help some sectors develop in a different way when the income picture, which is the result of cost and revenues and so on, when the income picture is challenging, we need to see, okay, there's private responsibilities, but there's also a public role. So what can we do as policymakers? So you ask, and I can tell you lots about that.
Excellent. I'm sure we're going to talk more about that. But I think it was really interesting. And as you said, it's a projection. And at the beginning of the day yesterday, when the Outlook was first presented, you said, look, here's what the projections are. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that we can't predict that would potentially increase volatility and impact on this. That includes climate change, geopolitical situations. There's extreme weather events. So to the extent that it's possible to project it, we now have some understanding of what the current policy framework would do. Monica, let me come back to you, because what I'd like to understand is, from the perspective of your farm, what are the income prospects for the farm? What are the key challenges that you see coming ahead, and what are the opportunities you have to try and get a little bit extra income that would help improve the financial viability of your farm?
Já si myslím, že z těch 2 dnů dnes je jasné, že ty příjmové vyhlídky farem v Evropské unii jsou velmi nejisté. To platí samozřejmě nejen pro obiloviny, ale i pro olejniny, platí to i pro zeleninu. Na jedné straně máme rekordní produkci, navzdory jarním obavám byla letošní sklizeň zhruba o 10% vyšší než 5letý průměr. To tlačí ceny obilovin i olejnin samozřejmě dolů a vytváří přebytek produkce, který musíme udat na exportních trzích. A na druhé straně zůstávají abnormálně vysoké náklady. Hnojiva, chemie. V posledních 5 letech, myslím si, že když řeknu číslo 35%, nebudu daleko od pravdy. Mzdové náklady vlastně taky pořád stoupají a o energiích ani nemluvím. Ale i myslím si, že velice složité je to, že i funkční podnik dnes cítí, že nejistota roste rychleji než jistota. No a obrovským a velmi konkrétním problémem jsou přípravky na ochranu rostlin. Už 5 let platí politický slib, že se nebudou zakazovat účinné látky, pokud za ně nebude existovat náhrada. Realita je taková, že za posledních 5 let Evropská unie nepovolila žádnou novou účinnou látku. Zakazují se staré a jako náhrada se nabízejí stejné látky, které ale kvůli rezistenci nefungují. V řepce, konkrétně v řepce, bylo vyřazeno zhruba 10 účinných látek a v obilovinách dokonce 20. Do budoucna jsou ohroženy i přípravky proti virózám v obilovinách a to je samozřejmě vážné riziko stability výnosů. Ale to tady bylo už po 2 dny vlastně také řečeno. Je důležité říci, že tento problém se netýká jenom obilovin, jenom olejnin, je to obecný problém napříč všemi komoditami, včetně ovoce a zeleniny. My, zemědělci, prvovýrobci, samozřejmě cílům udržitelnosti maximálně rozumíme, ale potřebujeme, aby se do praxe předkládaly způsobem, který skutečně funguje. Ono to někdy tak nevypadá, ale i my zemědělci chceme přenechat půdu i životní prostředí ve skvělé kondici našim dětem i dalším generacím, aby i oni měli co jíst a i oni mohli udržovat potravinovou bezpečnost jak České republiky, tak samozřejmě i Evropské unie.
Thank you for that. Lukáš, let me invite you to come in on this to say, what we just heard from Monica. How does this, is it different from other global competitors? Is it similar? Do they face the same drivers and concerns, the fewer and fewer products that they're allowed to use, the increasing resistance, the fact that, if you produce small, then sometimes the price then goes down, so it's a disincentive, etc. Are these the same pressures faced elsewhere?
Yes, I think in terms of dairy, I think if we look through the main competitors, so if we take, US, New Zealand, let's say, Latin America with Argentina as an example, all of those regions are more competitive in terms of costs. We are not competitive as an exporter. We need to export. We have 150% self-sufficiency. US has only 106. Of course, for our market, the key market is the local market. Yeah? But we need to look that, on average, I would say like that, the European costs are, let's say, plus 40 cents. And then when we look on the US, it's around maybe 35. And then if we look on systems which are grazing systems, like, let's say, New Zealand, Argentina would be 25, 30. And so there's a big difference, number one. Of course, we need to look, that there's different factors behind it. We have a different sizes and structure of the farms. We have different production systems. In Europe, we have much more family farms, which are much smaller. So we are already having issues with scale, how to scale this up, etc. But I think of course, a lot of regulations which are existing in Europe due to the much heavier populated areas in Europe, we look much more into, I would say, animal welfare or sustainable variables or quality of soil, etc., which are not, in many aspects, not regulated in those regions. Of course, on top we can add bureaucracy, if I can say. This was many stories already yesterday, today about all the bureaucracy, legislations for getting permits for buildings, etc. In Europe, it's much more heavier. And we are in the position that we need to export. I think was mentioned in the previous panel from UK. Yeah, so we can, of course, we need to focus on a valorization of every kg of milk, and the value addition is there. But of course, we need to, if I can say like that, get rid out of the byproduct, and those are powders, etc. So if we would like to compete, we need to decrease the cost of production. So especially with our, if we would like to target external markets with high value products, of course, we need to take care to promote properly, etc., be present there. And, if we will not stop rising costs and not increase the margins for the farmers, this future which was shown here, it's doubtful for me. Is the question, of course, maybe later we'll discuss a bit about the income and so on, is of course about the volatility, what happened on the market. Because projections, if we put it, okay, like I said, the price is foreseen to grow, but on the way, the question is how many farmers we will lose. We are losing, around 5 to 7% of the dairy farmers in Europe, yes, each year. So the question is, there is a future, but for who? And I think for us in Europe, we should focus especially on our farmers. Of course, I'm traveling around the world and I'm meeting a lot of farmers. And of course, we talk about the export possibilities, trading agreements, but our priority shall be, focusing on well-being of our farmers here. Yes, and I think this is the key to work that, they will be more competitive on global markets, because without that, we will have a challenge.
Thank you. Samuel, let me bring you in, because how do you see the role of consumers in maintaining a viable and resilient EU farm sector? What's their responsibility? What's their accountability? What's their role to play?
Yeah, I think that here, especially recently, I've seen more and more a frame that sees a bit of an adversarial position between the farming community and consumer community. And so I think that often instead we have to see that they are much more connected, and there is, especially from the consumer perspective, a support towards the farming sector. And at BEOCU this year we published a very interesting survey on what consumers expect from the CAP, for example. And here, of course, I will not list all the results, but there is really a strong support from the consumer towards the farming sector. And to just mention some of the points that were mentioned over these 2 days, so for consumer want subsidies to reach medium and small farmers. They want to again, to reward those who practice sustainable practices, and then again, for subsidies for young farmers. And so here again, there is a strong support from the consumers, and at the same time, there is also a rational interest from the consumers. So if we have a very strong and resilient farming sector, this means that this sector can resist better to the different shocks. And if it resists better to the different shocks, then it means that consumers eventually at the end of the food chain are better protected. And so there is really this union of interest between the two parts at the beginning and at the end of the food chain. And to this, and going back to this aspect that I mentioned before about the system, it's at the same time consumer want public support, subsidies to fix the situation, to better support those who practice what consumers expect and demand. And we just mentioned, for example, trade, and this is something that, from animal welfare to other topics, that we really continue to support, and to the fact that if we demand certain expectations from those who produce food in Europe, then we must find a way that is not protectionism, but is a way to protect from the imports. So because what is produced in Europe, what gets in Europe, must be of the same standards. And so it's really trying to build a coherent system where, from the different parts, makes sure that some expectations are follow up with all the different parts of this chain. So really trying to see the different parts and see how these can better cooperate.
Thank you. Gijs, you mentioned that it's written into the treaty from the absolute origins of the EU, which began as a project, rooted in the history of Europe of food insecurity in the post-war period. So there is a clear message that farmers are a strategic part of the autonomy of Europe, and that part of the role of the CAP is to deliver a viable future for them. So can you tell us a little bit more, now that we've had that analysis, and we can see that in some areas, viability of certain types of farms, certain sizes of farms is going to be reduced. So what's in the CAP toolbox to help us with that?
Yeah, thanks. In fact, I can build on what Lucas and Samuele have just outlined. Make sure you take care of your farmers in Europe, and also really respond to to what I think consumers, but consumers are also citizens, expect, and I think the stability and the security and the resilience of the food system that they expect. So what we traditionally have done is we have provided farmers with income support, decoupled from production, so that not to become too technical, but to avoid driving overproduction, but really to give farmers this cushion. And that we propose to continue. When I say propose to continue, I'm thinking about the next programming period of the Common Agricultural Policy starting in 2028. But what we do propose is to target it more for those who need it most. And we need to work with member states to enable them to identify those farmers that indeed need it most. And we propose this to be digressive and capped. In other words, a priority to medium and small-sized farms. But I think income support is one tool, one instrument that can help address some of the challenges for agriculture which has seen real income per worker increase, but is still lower than the average. The average income in agriculture is still at 60% of the average income in the economy. So it's still a challenge. So we need to also work with other tools. I think I would like to mention at least investment support, particularly when you see the challenges faced by, in the projections faced by the arable crops, the field crops sector. I think we really need to look at what can we do with innovation, what can we do with investments to support cost reduction on those larger arable farms, for example. Also, another aspect that links a bit to the issue of volatility that Lucas mentioned is risk management. We have already support in the CAP for risk management, mutual funds, insurance premia. And I think this is really an area where we can expand and do more, particularly because risk overall is increasing, either through climate change, geopolitics. So this is something where we will be working with member states to see how we can improve the uptake and the presence, the availability for farmers to actually take out these risk management tools to protect their revenues and their incomes towards 2035.
Excellent, thank you. We're now going to have our last block of conversation before I open the floor to you. So be ready with your questions. We've got the tool of Slido, and I know our online audience, you're going to be submitting questions via Slido. Here in the room, it'll be hands up, and I'll be coming to see what you've got to say. But this last set of conversations is going to look at the farmers, the consumers, and the structural change. And Monica, I'm going to begin with you because farming it's your job, but it's also clearly your life, your mission. Based on your experience, and Samuel talked about the relationship between consumers and farmers, how do you think consumers perceive you, farmers, as providers of their food, and what gives consumers a more positive image of farmers?
Tak samozřejmě spotřebitelé dnes vnímají farmáře hlavně a především skrz ceny potravin. Méně už vidí realitu, rizika a samozřejmě i dlouhodobá rozhodnutí. Vztah mezi farmářem a spotřebitelem není špatný v tom základu, ale určitě samozřejmě vzdálený. Pozitivní obraz vzniká tehdy, když se otevře poctivá debata, co jíme, v jaké kvalitě a samozřejmě odkud potraviny pocházejí. Když lidé vědí, co za jejich jídlem stojí, roste určitě jejich důvěra. No a musíme samozřejmě mezi spotřebiteli zakotvit, že umíme vytvořit kvalitní a bezpečné potraviny. Já si myslím, že je potřeba říci, že zemědělství není konflikt s přírodou, ale je to určitě práce s ní.
Thank you. Okay, Chris, let me bring you in because both Samuel and Monica have said there is no contradiction between consumers and farmers. They have shared vision. They want high quality food at a price that's affordable, etc. Is there a role for CAP, which is traditionally thought of as facing farmers, to actually bring farmers and consumers together to get more of that collaboration and bring that joint understanding?
Well, I think we already do it today. First thought that comes to mind is the organic logo. That's we regulate the organic sector, determine what is organic, what is not. This is a logo that is high recognition. We also have GIs, where geographical indications, also well known, I think at least to the audience in this room. So there are already a lot of links between what we do with agriculture and the consumer. I think this goes much more broadly. We have a number of programs also focused on children. The school scheme, school fruit, dairy products is an important one, and there's also accompanying measures that enable schools to bring children and farming closer together. So very practical examples. And of course also through promotion and communication actions we do quite a lot. But there I would like then to say that the best communication is the farmer themselves, right? So we really need to enable farmers to communicate directly with citizens, with consumers. And I think we have a lot of tools that can help us do that job.
Thank you. Samuel, you're our representative of the entire sort of European consumer views. Can you give us a sense of how, what you've heard from your members, how farmers are perceived, and what do EU consumers tell you about what they value about European farming? What is it that they see as the unique characteristics that they really appreciate?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, this aspect of I mentioned the survey and this connection, and I think it's important here to differentiate between the intention and what consumer can do, because when we are discussing all these different points, is that consumers have expectations, consumers have demand, but then often I get asked the question: are consumers willing to pay for what they ask? And I think that here the question is again, and this is why I mentioned in the beginning, the design of the system. Does the system give the consumers the opportunity to follow up on these points? Because otherwise, for example, if consumers consume less, they have less, and then retailers will try to maintain the same margins, and they will squeeze tighter negotiation with suppliers. Suppliers will do the same, and then eventually all this goes to the top of the food chain, and farmers absorb this shock. And so if we look at, for example, prices and the fact that over the last decades, farmers have had less and less of the share of the final retail price, with parts that goes even to below 10%. Then we look at the whole food chain and we say, where are we losing this value? Where is this value trapped? And how can we design the system in a different way where if consumers spend money on this specific item, then does this money get actually to the farmers? And so I think that here, it's why I keep mentioning, I'm a bit boring, but I keep mentioning these points of the whole food chain, and where is the value trapped, and how can we make sure to distribute better this value across the food chain so that we don't have winner or loser or an aspect of one pointing the finger to the other, but really trying to see how can we make sure that everyone wins in this food chain.
Thank you, and you mention back to what Monica had said at the very beginning of the panel, where she said, look, the farmer is the sort of the weakest, most vulnerable element in the chain, and when the supply chain is squeezed, it's the farmer who gets the greatest pressure. And you've just said that actually they're getting a smaller and smaller proportion of what value exists in the chain. So, Lukáš, let me bring you in to say, is there a vision around the world? Is there a prominence for a preference for locally sourced produce across the world? We heard from Gijs that one of the tools of the CAP is the geographical indications, the support and promotion for, this is a quality product made in this area, and to link into all of that culture and traditions. Is that something we see elsewhere in the world? Is there a strong prominence for local production?
I think in many regions in the world still, of course, the price play the dominant role. And I think we also need to talk about the affordability and accessibility. We see also the poverty globally is increasing. So also not many people have access to this, what they want. And informal market for milk, it's also growing faster than formal market. I think not many of us knows that the 45% of the milk globally produced informally. What does it mean? It's not delivered to the processors and processed. And this market, which is sold on the street, consumed at house, etc., is growing faster than the formal market. I would say I think it's always important, the local recognition, and I think it's also visible in different countries. But for me, it's also, if we talk about Europe, what does it mean local? It doesn't mean European, doesn't mean Polish, German, and doesn't mean in Germany, my region. And I think this is the question, what does it mean in reality recognition and the quality? And for me, question would be, okay, how dominant is this choice? Because I think from this, what we discussed already, currently the price play the dominant role. So I think it's important, I think, and I will say that when we discuss the topics about, the Mercosur deal, all the trade stuff, I fully support. I think we need to find a way to be able to check what we are getting to our market, because it's impacting directly the competitiveness also of our farmers. I think we need to be very much aware of that, because with all of those regulations which we have, we discussed that already. We produce, in terms of milk, we can imagine we produce premium class car, Mercedes. We have animal welfare and that and that. And at the end, we need to compete with the prices globally, which are Volkswagen Polo. And I think, if we will not take care of that, we will have a problem. I think for increasing the consumption of our local goods, we also need to invest more. I think maybe this is the role of EU Commission in education of young generation. What does it mean quality? What does it mean local product? Because when I talk with my mother is telling me, Lucas, whenever I'm going to supermarket, I believe that what I'm buying has the best quality. I have no time for checking the stuff. I think there are for sure clients who are checking all of those labels, etc. But just to be honest, average consumer is not doing that. Yes, they are getting what is there. I was last week in Edeka in Germany, in Schleswig-Holstein, where I'm living, and when I entered the market, there was a different spread of the butter. Yes, and there were like branded butter for maybe €3.99, and there was currently the basic butter cost 99 cents. And you can imagine which shelf was wiped out before Christmas. Yes, so this is premium shop, and then I expect premium clients if we can sell like that. And this is where I'm saying there is something wrong with the system, and I think the education, explanation also to the consumers, what does it mean high quality? It's important because we need to manage expectations. I fully agree. Clients want to have affordable product with good quality. But if also the expectations from, let's say, CAP policy is to increase the sustainability, we also need to, number one, reconsider expectations of farmers. They need to be paid for that. And they cannot be left alone. And it's not only farmers, it's the whole supply chain. Because, it was just mentioned that the share for the farmers is also dropping in the final product. Huh?
Thank you. That brings me to this sort of final area to concentrate on, which is high prices and affordability and margins, and you've touched on that. Samuel, I'm going to begin with you, because if you look at data from across the EU, sort of citizens in some countries are paying around 12% of their income on foods, and in other countries it's as high as 20%. And some of those are particularly poorer countries, so a larger proportion of their overall income is going on food, and if they've also got to compete with high energy prices and housing costs and a general cost of living crisis, you can see where the squeeze comes for consumers. So we saw that yesterday. We saw the fact that, there was a huge spike in food inflation prices. It's come down to the normal levels of around 2%. But we still see that the prices themselves haven't come down very much. So do you see a change in consumer patterns and therefore a direct income on the farm incomes? Is there anything else that's being brought in there that we've got, for example, an emphasis on more or less processed products? Can you just give us a sense of how you see those trends evolving?
Yeah, and here I think Lukasz already mentioned this, is that at the end of the day, price is really the main factor influencing behavior. And so here we know that especially over the last couple of years, consumers have changed their consumption patterns, and we have already now 1 in 3 mentioning they struggle to afford food. The statistics you mentioned, they are important, but then at the same time, they don't take into consideration the differences in the population. So there are groups that struggle even more than that to access food. So they are changing their behaviors. And here, some of the ways in which this reflects on the consumption patterns is that they are trading down. So, for example, they are buying from the same products. We can go from the premium to the more basic one. So they are buying the basic one of the same products. They are changing what they eat, because there are, of course, foods that are more expensive than other, better quality, and these different changes. They are changing when and how they purchase as well, because they rely more on promotion, they rely more on multi-buy. And here, this will not be per se a problem, but we know that less healthy food are often the one associated with this promotion. So we could have another problem there. And then they react differently, not all consumers. So some, for example, buy more primary ingredients to then be able to cook more, but then even this is not everyone has the skill, time, and all these different parts to do this, while others, they rely more on processed food. And so here I think it's a matter really of fairness as well, because we mentioned the organic food, we mentioned quality food, we mentioned all these different expectations the consumer have. And if we connect these, they are basically basic rights from the consumers. If we connect them only to the pricing, then they become privileges that some can afford, while the others are left out. So I think that here, really trying to mitigate and try to support consumers in accessing quality food, because this is really important. They need to access not only food, but they need to access quality food. And so here measures are really necessary to improve, from reduction of VAT on fruit and vegetables or direct subsidies. We have really a range here that could be implemented, but really there's the slogan that we always repeat, make the healthy choice the easy choice for everyone. And I think that here with pricing, it's really a reflection on what we really need to target.
Thank you. I've only got a couple of minutes left on this panel before I open it to the audience. So, Monica and Lukasz, I'm going to ask you a question, if I can get a very short answer. So, Monica, for you, the impact of food inflation from the farmer's perspective, what impact do you think it will have on the overall viability of farms?
Já bych jenom tady zmínila jednu věc, která tady byla, a to logo zeměpisného označení původu. Dokonce moje farma, máme od roku 2008, jsme v rejstříku zeměpisného označení původu Všestarská cibule. Takže funguje to a myslím si, že by se to mohlo i hodně lépe prezentovat. Ale co se týká samozřejmě potravinové inflace, tak vyšší ceny v obchodech se rozhodně u obilovin a u olejnin jen minimálně promítly do příjmu prvovýroby. Zároveň pořád platí to, že trh je dnes extrémně nepředvídatelný. Stačí pokles nebo naopak vyšší produkce a ceny reagují okamžitě a v podstatě skokově. Viděli jsme například u řepky, kdy při nižší sklizni cena velmi rychle vystřelila nahoru. Farmáři se tak pohybují vlastně mezi rekordní sklizní a nízkými cenami na jedné straně a mezi vysokými náklady a nejistotou na straně druhé. No a ze všech stran, když tomu přidáme již zmíněnou byrokracii, restrikce, to zásadně samozřejmě, taky to tady bylo zmíněno, omezuje investice. No a bez investic není modernizace, není odolnost, není dlouhodobá životaschopnost. Takže bez ohledu na velikost farmy určitě dnes cítíme velkou nejistotu. S obrovskou samozřejmě nejistotou, tu nejistotu vnímáme ve vazbě na klimatickou změnu, na novou společnou zemědělskou politiku, na těžko uchopitelnou geopolitickou situaci, potom ESG reporting, NIS 2, zákon o kybernetické bezpečnosti a tak dále a tak dále. Takže čím více budeme v Evropě to zemědělství redukovat, o to více samozřejmě ty potraviny budeme dovážet. Taková je realita. I my zemědělci samozřejmě potřebujeme silnou Evropskou unii. Žijeme tady, chceme tady žít, žijí tu naše děti, tady potřebujeme jednotná pravidla, ale i předvídatelné prostředí, ale taky stabilní a samozřejmě funkční politiku. Všichni, co tady jsme, všichni, co posloucháme, musíme 3krát denně jíst. A taková je realita. Tak proč si to tady v té Evropě všecko nevyrobit, protože si myslím, že na to ten základ máme. Takže za mě, já doufám, že budu jednou moci s hrdostí a samozřejmě ve skvělé kondici předat i tu svoji farmu následujícím generacím a že se za svoji práci nebudu muset stydět.
Thank you, Monica. Lukesh, can I get a very brief comment from your perspective? Are these pressures on margins the same elsewhere? I mean, we've talked about some of these challenges, and Monica and Samuel have mentioned them. Are other parts of the world facing the same pressure on margins?
Yeah, we can say like that. I think number one, just to say that the milk prices for all the exporters are defined by 7% of the total milk production globally. What does it mean? What we are trading in terms of commodities globally is impacting our markets and farm gate milk prices as the price is transmitted, number one. So if we are the competitor, most of the competitors are dealing with similar trends. Of course, we have deviations from the trends. We saw it last, I would say, 2 years in Europe. It was mainly because we were lacking of milk. We were lacking butter fat. Most of the production went going for cheeses, and butter prices were just very high, skyrocketing, and that's why we farmers were enjoying higher milk prices. On average, we had the record average milk price in Europe, around 55 euro cents. But this was the combination of lack of butter on the market globally, decrease of the production in Europe, and in reality, we produce less with more value. But now we came to the point that we have the, I will say, flush of milk, if I can say like that. The weather was good globally everywhere. US produced more than expected. Europe produced more. We have Argentina, New Zealand also popping up. So I will say like this, that we have the same conditions, of course, global and then the local specification number one. And if we look, of course, this is the point about the volatility and keeping the margins stable for the farmers. From our analysis, we see globally, if the farm is not generating income between 3 to 5 years, is quitting the business. It was confirmed with different studies, which we did in our research network. So, we are currently coming for dairy with the prices around 40, 45 euro cents. I would say average, of course, it's different in different countries. But this is the breaking even point right now. If we are coming to a situation like we had in 2020, 21, I can tell most of the farms were in reality generating income out of decoupled subsidies, which are some between 10 to 20% of the farm income. Yes, and this is, I think, the point. Because if we would like to develop forward, we need to have tools to be able to keep the margins more stable. We cannot impact, the global milk prices because we are still exporter. Of course, we are focusing on different things on the farm. We already talked about that: efficiency, productivity, management. Of course, the different story is the energy prices, which we are struggling. I think we didn't discuss too much about the labor price. And labor efficiency was already tackled, but also the labor price. We see that, average salaries in specific countries, like, for example, Germany, are sometimes in specific regions higher than what can be generated on the farm. So we are lacking incentives. And I think, like I said, if you have a well-managed farm, if I can say like that, your local prices are good, and you can expand and reinvest part of your income into the expansion, this is great. But of course, it looks different in different parts of Europe. But I think this is where we need to bring, if I can say, more stability, because still we are exporter. So I would just say maybe at the end, if we look globally, and when I look on the CAP policy, we need to, I think, ask essential question. Do we want to export in the future dairy products? Yes. Do we want to have more Canadian model, I would say like that, more regulated, where we are plus minus self-sufficient with some extra exports of maybe high value-added products like cheeses or ingredient markets, etc. Because if we would like to participate in the global market, we need to find a way to manage the volatilities. Yeah? Because if we will be not able to do it, then farmers will need to struggle with the access to capital, innovation, implementation, all of that. How you can do it if you have 50 cows? Yeah. Access to capital, a big topic. Yeah? How we can compete with a farmer in the US which has, I don't know, 15,000 cows? Or with Argentinian farmer which is doing profit right now with 28 euro cents milk price, and they do still profit. I was there some weeks ago visiting, and they are planning with key companies like, I would say, to Nestle, etc. They see a vision of doubling output of Argentina. Yes? And I think this is a big topic, but I think this will be my message here. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking at time, I've got about sort of 8 to 10 minutes that will allow me to bring in some questions. So do I see questions here in the hall with a question? I've got a very keen person there with their hand up. We'll bring you a microphone. Do I have anyone else? If not, I've got loads of questions on Slido to get to. So I've got a gentleman there and I've got a lady there. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Roel Jongeneel from Wageningen University and Research. I have a question on the, of several questions, maybe on the income data. With respect to the, say, link with the economic accounts, I see it clearly. But say, if it is about the impact on farms, then what I would like to see is a bit more which part is coming, say, from the, because we are in a market outlook session, we are about prices, about volume. So which part is coming from the outlook part? And which part is coming, say, from farm development and the scale development of the farm? Because that's for me not so clear now. Okay. While we are here at an outlook setting. Right. And the other thing is about, for example, farm viability. There's now farm viability introduced here without I quickly scanned the document without a clear definition. Economic viability of farms is also in the policy discussions, I think, becoming a very crucial thing. Now, for example, dairy comes out now quite favorable, but I think in terms of the sustainability requirements and the investments that this sector have to make, it's also quite challenging. And I don't see how all these things are smuggled in or figured out. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. And in case these tough questions are coming to you. Just to let you know.
I was afraid so, yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you for this great discussion. So the discussion shows that strong alignment between the consumer expectations and farming objectives, yet farmers receive a declining share of the final food price. So which concrete mechanisms in the food value chain, such as contracts, pricing practices or bargaining power, are currently preventing consumer spending on quality food from translating into stable farm incomes? And the follow-up explanation question, what about the climate extremes and how, what is the place of the climate extremes in this discussion? Thank you very much.
Before you, just let us know who you are, introduce yourself.
My name is Bengu Akürek and I'm working in the European Environment Agency. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So maybe some of those questions might come to other members of the panel. But Hes, you're on the hot seat first. How did you calculate some of these things? What do we actually mean by viability? And when we calculate income, are we talking about sort of cash for outputs, or are we taking into account things like development mechanisms on the farm? Answers in 2 minutes, please.
Answers in 2 minutes. I have the answer on WhatsApp. So I think this is all about classification, right? So we took 3 groups and we've made these classifications according to a number of economic criteria. I don't know if it's important now to dwell on that, but I think that's key because obviously you are right in analyzing that there is part which is economic outlook. We heard the session before on global on the global outlook, that of course has a tremendous impact, for example, on the picture also on the dairy sector. And clearly, structural change is a key element of any projection in agriculture, and also this one. So, but the precise connection between the two, I think, really depends on the sector. On your point in relation to sustainability, clearly there are member states, regions where considerable additional investments are necessary to be able to have, if you could say, a license to produce, to be able to meet regulatory standards. So obviously that is also something that comes into play. But I think it's difficult for me to answer the precise link between all the different elements. But I'm sure that there is an opportunity to dive further into the economics behind this assessment, and we would really look forward to doing that also.
Thank you. Lukesh, I wonder if you could answer perhaps or comment on the question that we had from the colleague from the European Environment Agency, because she was looking to see, contracts, pricing, what could be done to sort of help smooth out some of the volatility that farms deal with?
I think the key market for us is still European market. Most of the product is sold here. I don't know, maybe I will not make friends with that, but I will really look into a bit the power and strength of the discounters and the retail network. I know that we are talking a lot about the, that everything needs to be affordable and cheap. But like I said, maybe something there, but it's just really small point. I think the issue is about how the things are contracted, that farmer maybe also get more insights into the future price. I think this will require also that on the European level we have that we have a knowledge how much does it cost to produce, let's say, milk. Yes, I know that still many farmers have no clue what is the total cost of milk production. They can calculate feed costs. In some countries, in Germany, I don't know what would be percentage. I know that around 50% maybe. I think this is one issue really. And if we could improve maybe that with whole data management behind it, that we can really better value the milk and the product. And of course, the weather is coming to the play, there are droughts, there's stuff, so the value really can be on local market different. And at the end, it's also shown in the final product for the consumers, at least in the European Union, because of course we cannot recharge that outside with the export as we need to compete there, but at least here it can be maybe visible and the consumer can be also informed. I don't know. Those are just some small points. Probably there's much more ideas.
Excellent, thank you. Time has not been our friend, because I can see I've got 1.5 minutes left in this session, and there's lots that I think we could discuss. I very much hope we'll continue this conversation over coffee. But let me invite everyone on this panel to just give me a sort of 20-second soundbite. We began this session by saying this is the first time that the Agri Outlook report has attempted to map out and project the impact at farm level on income and on environmental performance. So I would say the level of interest and engagement here says bravo for doing it, and we'll want more of that in the future. It was clearly something that has opened up new opportunities to explore what it is we want to do with CAP. But so each of the panel, can I get a 20-second message on this first attempt to understand the impact for different types of farms of what the future would hold? So what's your final message?
For me, risking to be boring again with what I mentioned throughout all the panel, it's really this aspect of how do we design the system so that each player can contribute at best. And in the case of consumer, really not just focusing on what they can do in this specific moment and not considering the different conditions, but how can we empower consumers really to support the farmers and to contribute to the rest of the system.
Excellent. That's not boring. It's being consistent in your messaging, which makes you a good advocate.
Hitting the nail.
So that's great. Monica, 20 seconds. The Commission have done this for the first time, attempted to look at the impact of these things. What final message would you like to leave?
Já se tomu poselství přidám taky. Já si myslím, že určitě je potřeba, abychom edukovali spotřebitele a abychom jim vysvětlovali, že to, co vyrobíme tady, je bez uhlíkové stopy, nebo bezuhlíkové samozřejmě, s uhlíkovou stopou tomu odpovídající, ale aby kupovali evropské potraviny a aby evropské zemědělce určitě podporovali, protože my pro ně budeme vyrábět ty nejlepší potraviny na světě.
Thank you. Yukesh.
No, I think it's a good attempt. I think for me, most important, we cannot change something we are not measuring. I think so looking into modeling, etc. is important. I will just say that, what we also need to improve in Europe, it's for sure understanding economic impact of farm investments to really understand not only farm but the supply chain. If we are introducing new regulations, etc., is this honestly something which we need? Is this profitable? And I think it was said yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, by Finnish farmer, we need really more stability in the policies. We shall have a long-term strategy for agriculture, for dairy, to really understand what we can expect. Because for me, the bureaucracy shall be the last piece which I should think about when I do business, and not to be dominant. Yeah? So this will be for me the final statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Gis, close our session, please.
Well, this is the College of Competitiveness, and I think talking about margins is really the right thing to do. Looking what really counts is what do farmers make a living out of this, and I think that's really important that we have this discussion. I think I'd also like to mention that in terms of competitiveness, we have a major drive in terms of simplification, with a number of simplification actions that we have been delivering also for the CAP and for farmers, and more coming. And margins is all about fairness also in the supply chain. And I didn't mention that yet earlier, but I do want to mention the work on unfair trading practices, supporting farmers to cooperate. All that also contribute really to their competitiveness in the market. So if we can use this data and this analysis to further improve our policies and the way we organize the economy, the agricultural economy, I think we are on a good path.
Excellent. Can we please say a warm thank you to the panel for their engagement? Over to you, Sasha.
And thank you very much. Thank you. Some really, really interesting things. And Monica, thank you so much for your real life experience that you brought, but some fabulous stuff from the panel. Thank you. What we are going to do now is take one more quick break, and then we're going to look at that last issue that we talked about this morning, the last area, and that is the environmental side of things, the challenges and the opportunities of the adaptation to climate change, how that has been covered in the Outlook report, and how that fits into the future. So let's take a break. I'm sure our panelists will be happy if you wanted to come and talk to them more. And then we'll be back in just under half an hour. Incidentally, we do still have the stands out there if you want to talk to the Outlook report team. The JRC is still out there. There's also the FEN, thank you, is out there as well. So they are all there to have a chat with. Plus, if you haven't yet got your seed yet, you can go and do your planting exercise as well. So for those who are joining us online, it'll be half an hour and we'll be back in the room. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.